All right. Good afternoon, perhaps good morning or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this edition of PON Live. Today, the program on negotiation together with the Abraham Path Initiative is delighted to present this event entitled Impossible Negotiations, Lessons for Everyday Life from the Abraham Path. My name is Nicole Bryant, and I'm the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. The Program on Negotiation is a consortium between Harvard University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Tufts University. And today's event is presented jointly with the Program on Negotiation and our friends, or maybe even I would go so far to say siblings at the Abraham Path Initiative. And I am delighted for this opportunity to partner with them once again. We're seeing in the chat, folks are putting where they're coming in from. Thank you to our participants coming from all over the world. Make sure you select panelists and attendees if you want your fellow attendees to see and not just us panelists. We are delighted that you've taken this time to be with us today. After the discussion, there will be time for questions. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function on the bottom right-hand screen, right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Because that allows other participants to upvote your question in case they have the same one. If you have a comment, you can of course always write it in the chat. This talk is going to be recorded and it will be posted on the PON website in a couple of days in case you missed a part or you want to share it with someone else. And finally, I'd like to thank the wonderful staff at PON, especially Anna Chang and Diane Long, for all of the hard work that they have put into getting this event set up today. And with that, I'm delighted to hand over the virtual Zoom mic to our all-star panel, beginning, of course, with our moderator, Claire Hajjaj, who is the Policy Director for Intermediate and a member of the Advisory Council of the Abraham Path Initiative. Claire, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you also to Harvard for making this happen. It's never easy these days, and there's a lot of work gone into it. So thank you very much for giving us this platform in this time. Thank you also, I should say, to the Program on Negotiation, to Josh and William for being, let's say, the conduit, the hub of the wheel, bringing us together, and to Susan and Ra for giving their time to this. And to the hundreds, I think even maybe up to 1,000, I don't know exactly, but something close to that of people joining us from around the world. And I'm seeing even now just on the screen from Bangalore, from Ukraine, from Brussels, from absolutely everywhere. And it is incredibly appropriate. I think the Abraham Path was set up to bring people together across great distances and to spark conversations that might not otherwise have happened. And so I really hope that everybody joining us will, be loud, participate, be controversial, say stuff. We'll keep an eye on the Q&A and we'll try to get to questions, but that's the spirit of this. And I should acknowledge people already who are not here, but who are fundamental to this discussion, the people who are now curating and taking care of the path, Anissa Mehdi, the director, and all those in all the countries who are still keeping it alive, even under these incredibly difficult circumstances. So with that, I just want to introduce this amazing group of panelists who I've been very, very happy to get to know some of them over the last few days and weeks. First, Josh Weiss should kind of need no introduction. He is one of the world's leading negotiation experts, also one of the most humble and generous negotiation experts, despite the stature, co-founder of the Abraham Path, and the Harvard Program and the Global Negotiation Initiative, among many other strings to his bow, and author of negotiation books for all ages, and somebody who I know from personal experience can keep a busload of strangers laughing all the way from Jerusalem to Jenin, which is not an easy thing to do. Susan Colin Marks, someone who has had one of the world's most extraordinary and far-reaching careers in mediation and bringing peace. She once, I found out, took a rubber bullet in the leg as a young woman facing off against apartheid in South Africa. So she's been on the front line. Then she helped to transform a racist South African police force into a police service for all, and took those lessons out into an extraordinary career spanning continents, mediation some of the world's most intractable conflicts. Ra Goddess, who lights up any room she's in, founder of Move the Crowd, an organization that is dedicated to helping people become change makers in their own lives and in the lives of others. A soul coach, an author, fellow adventurer on the path, and also someone who should need no introduction, Dr. William Ury, who is the progenitor of the path in more ways than one, practical ways, but also sort of spiritually a veteran of every negotiation pretty much you've ever heard of, and many you have not. An author, a teacher, the co-founder of the whole program, and someone who can absolutely have 100 impossible ideas before breakfast, but can also make them happen. And William, we are here to talk about the impossible today, and what the path has to say, the Abraham path has to say. This walking route, something as simple as a walking route, that something like that should have something to teach us about negotiations is itself exceptional. And I remember when we walked the path a few years ago, and you were telling me the story of how this path came to be, at this moment in 2001, after the Twin Towers fell, and the world had suffered this appalling wound. And I remember at the time you said that we hadn't even at that point understood how deep the wound was going to be. And you had this idea, this impossible idea, to create this walking route, this crazy idea to chart a path through all the people and places that the West happened to be most afraid of at that exact moment in history. And it was a radical remedy to this fear and this retreat that we were all facing. And now here we are 20 years on, exactly 20 years on in a way. And the world has suffered another very deep wound, series of wounds, from COVID and the isolation of the pandemic, the extraordinary polarization that we are facing across our democracies and societies, particularly in the US, George Floyd and the trauma of racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. So the question I have for you, but then if you can, I'd love you to hand the baton on to the other panelists, is when you look back at that moment when you first created the path and came up with this crazy idea, those first experiences of establishing it, walking it, and caring for it, what lessons come to your mind that you think speak most to this moment, this kind of wounded moment, and these impossible challenges that we're facing today?
Well, thank you, Claire, and thank you, fellow panelists, and thank you all for joining from around the world, because this call itself is what the path is all about. It's about sparking an unlikely conversation from around the world around what we're afraid of and what can bring us together. And that was really, yeah, Claire, you're reminding me, like 20 years ago, just in the face of 9/11, in the face of the war in Afghanistan, 20 years now, the war in Iraq, just the countless wars around the world, the so-called war against terror, and the fear and separation that creates. And so the whole idea of the path was, what could bring us together? What could, a simple step, just go for a walk and maybe learn about the people that you're afraid of. And that's been the amazing thing about the path, is that everyone, and there've been thousands of people who now walk the path in so many different countries in the Middle East, which is this ancient path that has a story to do with it. Then there's an old saying that, some conflicts are so difficult, so impossible, that only a story can heal them. And I think the story of the path, the story of Abraham, it's kind of an ancient story of someone who challenges the authority of his time as a boy, and finds out that in fact we're all linked, we're all interconnected, and goes for a walk to find himself and with his family, and discovers hospitality, discovers the magic of being taken in by strangers and offered hospitality. And that's what you discover on the path. You go for a walk, you go into a village, you stay in someone's home, you share hospitality, you find out a little bit about them. And that's not the end of dealing with impossible negotiations, but it certainly is the beginning, is to meet the other, to listen to the other, to put yourself in their shoes, to walk in their shoes. So it's a huge pleasure. And I think the lessons are as relevant today as they were 20 years ago. And everything that we're facing is we're facing walls of separation, and we need to build paths of connection.
So, Josh, I remember you saying that you were one of the first people that William talked to when he came up with this crazy idea, this impossible idea. What was your reaction? Do you remember? And then how has experience transformed what you thought this path can deliver? What are the lessons that you've taken from it?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I remember very well the first conversation that William and I had about this. And by the way, I've already violated a rule, which is never to follow William when I speak, because he's just so eloquent. It never goes so well. But nonetheless, we'll roll with it. But I remember William sharing this idea with me and saying, laying out this idea of trying to recreate this route and dust off the footprints, if you will. And my first reaction is, this is crazy and we should definitely do it. Because I think that when you're up against kind of different questions and challenges that face humanity, I think you have to have big ideas and ideas that are different. And I think in so many ways, this idea has captured people's imagination. It's interesting when I talk to people who have walked the path or been part of this organization, our partners on the ground, et cetera. There's such a passion for this project. It's quite amazing. I've never been involved in anything else that quite touches people in the same way. And so there's something there. And I think it's actually that humility and the humble nature of walking that makes you vulnerable. And when you go from village to village and you're in a region where you're quote unquote supposed to be afraid of people, and when you walk into their village, all of a sudden kids come running and the hospitality just flows in a way that we don't really see here in the US. It's very easy to quickly sort of realize that what you thought, what you imagined about a certain place was just not true. And it's interesting because William mentioned hospitality, and I just want to say, one of the things that I was always struck by was that the people that had the very least had the most hospitality. They were the most generous and the most giving. And I absolutely think that there's a lesson in there for our world where we are today, that we need to get back to a place where we see others in a way that is human. And there's a great quote that William recently actually shared with me from William Butler Yeats that said, "There are no strangers here, only friends that you haven't met yet." And really, that is the path in a nutshell. And I think in the world that we live in with COVID and the separation that we all feel, being able to engage with others and experience some of that humanity at a very personal level is part of the way back to where we need to go.
So, I'm reminded of some of the reading that I did before this, and I was reading some articles that Susan had written about her experiences in South Africa that seem very pertinent to this experience of humanization that you're talking about. So it's a word that actually Ra has used herself, rehumanization as a concept that this world at the moment seems to be completely opposite of. We're in a dehumanizing trend rather than a rehumanizing trend. And Susan, I wanted to ask you, your earliest experiences of walking were not necessarily walking for peace. You were a part of a protest movement. Your family, your mum took you to really see apartheid and this experiences that you had. But in your later career, after helping to shepherd South Africa after this, out of apartheid into a new sort of experience, then you talked about peace as a journey towards wisdom. And I wonder, so we talked before about the power of walking together, and where do you think, what relevance do you feel that the Abraham Path has as a bridge, if you like, walking as a bridge between protest and reconciliation? And it's kind of played that role in places like the West Bank, in really brutalized communities like the West Bank. So what relevance do you feel that it has for these challenges today, polarization, racism, brutalization, where that pain runs so deep?
Oh, thank you for such a wonderful question, Claire. The path, I've been involved with the path since nearly the beginning. I was on the board, and because I was also living in Jerusalem, immediately after 9/11 for a couple of years as the vice president of Search for Common Ground. I was there with what was happening and with the feelings in myself and the feelings all around me. And my sense of the path has always been that in many ways it's its own metaphor, that it's that you put one foot in front of the other. This is how we build towards peace. And when we were protesting in South Africa, when I was there as a peace builder with the protesters, with often Archbishop Desmond Tutu at the front and other luminaries, what was happening there was people giving voice in a non-violent way. And there's a huge distinction here between giving voice in a non-violent way and in the violent way that we're seeing in so much of the world. And the non-violent way is a statement, it's words being spoken. And one of the ways that we do that is to humanize. And to me, this is the absolute key to just about everything, is that we humanize the other, that we see each other as human beings with everything in common. You know, more unites us than divides us. And I wanted to tell you a little story from South Africa, as you've mentioned it, which is that as you said, I was working on the transformation of the apartheid, the brutal apartheid police force to a police service. And once we were into that process, I was right there in the middle of it. I was asked one day to go and address the feared riot police. They really were feared. Would I come and speak to them? And I went to this place full of people, and I had no idea what I could say. And even as I stood up in front of them, I had no idea what to say. And what I found, what came out of my mouth was I said, you are the rocks of your family. You would do absolutely anything for them. You would go through fire and rain at 3 in the morning to help them. Now you're being asked to bring that same kindness to the people that you police, especially to the Black community who had been so brutalized by the police. And what I was asking them to do was to, in our language, to extend their circles of compassion. I said, it's who you are at home, now be that at work. And what I was doing was drawing out the best of them. When we speak to the best in people, we get it back. A little while later, I was talking to a Black leader in the Black township, and he said to me, he was laughing and telling me a story. He said, the first time a policeman called me sir, I nearly fainted. And then the second time it happened, I nearly fainted again. And he was laughing at the wonder of it, as well as he was making it into a very, very funny story. His wonder was that the inconceivable had happened. And what was going on here from the perspective of somebody like me who'd been in the policing story since the beginning, where the question was, what are we going to do with this? To now in the throes of instituting community policing and so on. This was the accumulation of change working. And that's what I see on the path. Having seen the path right from about the beginning and seeing the accumulation of change that the path brings, we can take that anywhere in the world. And my story from South Africa, which is so concrete, is merely a reflection of that. It all fits together. This is all a jigsaw puzzle, and there can be no pieces missing.
That's an incredibly powerful story. And I think, again, coming to back to this point of rehumanization, that the point that you're making is that there are these huge intractable problems. When you look at them at the political level, they seem unfixable, like a Rubik's Cube that somebody's saying, you know, solve this. And I don't even really know where to start. And then the rehumanization process, people dealing with people, not outside a political framework, but, you know, people dealing with people, gives you a place to start that you can build on. And Ra, I just wanted to ask you, rehumanization was your word. I love this word. It was just such a great idea. You said that rehumanization is the starting point of profound change, whether it's in yourself or whether it's in communities. And I just wanted to say, and I'm looking at these questions that are coming in, and there's a couple that are really stood out to me because they essentially ask the same thing. That people saying, when we're in pain, when we've been wronged, and the path goes to a lot of communities who really do feel that they have been wronged, and they have been wronged, you know, why should we go and negotiate for what we deserve, for our due? Like, why? What's the value? What's the intrinsic value of you know, meeting your enemy, the people that are hurting you, and asking them for stuff? And I know that, you know, you've experienced as well, you know, very, very deeply the pain of particularly the African American community in the US at the moment, who are kind of asking the same questions, like, why should we negotiate for what's our due? From your perspective, what does the path have to say about that fundamental question?
You know, I mean, I think it comes back to the context that we create. And I do think we have a profound opportunity to come from a different context. You know, I think there's one context that says, you have all the power and I have no power. And when I come to the table, it is a matter of asking, right? Or begging, right? For human decency, for common respect. But what if we challenge that that's not the context and the place that we want to come from? What if we challenge the context and the place that we want to come from is actually that we all have power, that our work is actually to identify that power, to touch that power, to reach that power inside of ourselves. Because I think that until we see our own humanity, it's very difficult to come into these conversations and see the humanity of the other. And, you know, when we talk about this conversation of rehumanization, a lot of what we speak to is about the other. But what is our relationship with ourselves? What is it that we have internalized that causes us to dehumanize ourselves? What is it that we have internalized that causes us to see ourselves as less than worthy? Often when we sit in these conversations and we sit at these tables. You know, it's interesting that you raise that, Claire, because when the George Floyd murder occurred, and I have many, you know, and this is one of the things that I think the African American community was wanting to communicate to the global world with lots of resonance, is that this is not the first incident, right? In other words, George Floyd was not the first, right, to die in those kinds of circumstances. It just so happened that we were slowed down enough to actually witness what occurred. And I remember in my own conversation with my own spirit about, you know, what is my work here? Do I continue to do the work that I've always been doing? Or is there another level or another way that I am to be of use or to be of service in this work? And I remember very specifically having the call to start working with white males. And, you know, again, lots of conversations about, you know, who are you? And, and given what you embody, how could you possibly be effective there, right? These are all of the things. And I see William and Joshua smiling because they know these conversations happen a lot in global contexts, right? But for me, what I recognized, Claire, was that what I was being called to was the practice of being willing to confront my own apathy and my own resignation about the other and their humanity and their sense of humanity. And so when I'm in these conversations with white leaders who I have the privilege of working with, and when I'm, you know, sort of inviting us to break the fourth wall of what has been the traditional posturing and what we've known has sort of sat at the root of conflict, particularly as it relates to race, particularly as it relates to the history in the United States, we have to sit in different places. We have to see one another from different perspectives. And I have to see their humanity. I have to be willing to let go of what has been sort of a conditioning sometimes of entrenched righteousness even, to be able to open a door, to be able to open a portal for connection. Right, there's a quote, it's funny, I was looking this morning as I was thinking about our conversation today. And I've been thinking a lot about the openness of the heart as a practice, and the way in which we open our hearts. And there's a beautiful quote. It says, the most valuable possession you can own is an open heart. And the most powerful weapon you can be is an instrument of peace. That was Carlos Santana, right? But it's so, for me, it's so spot on. My work and our work is to keep our hearts open in the face of intractable challenges, in the face of what seem like walls and places where there is no movement or no possibility for movement and no possibility for change and transformation. This work is 360-degree work, Claire, right? Because I'm doing it in the context of my own community, and as we're crossing the waters and crossing the shores and crossing the perceived boundaries, I'm doing it in those communities as well.
Yeah, you're right. It's 360-degree work and 365-day a week, a year work as well. I mean, it's an ongoing journey. And one of the things that you know, we talked about this before, but it definitely struck me the irony of talking about a walking route and rehumanization and the work of bringing people together at a time when we have been sort of physically and psychologically more separated from each other than we ever have been for the last few decades even. And this enclaving that's happening, where there are a lot of comments coming up in the chat here, really valid testing comments. You're like, how do you reason? Are there people that are just beyond reasoning with? I mean, particularly in the US, but in other places as well. The US is not the center of the universe, but where people really feel like there are some communities where they would not be welcome, that are beyond reason. And the path, to me, I remember walking it, had this really kind of very simple but very radical idea that I've since seen reflected in other negotiations, big negotiations, that you need to take yourself out of your physical space and go to someone else's if you want to start the process of unlocking something. And in negotiations, and William knows better than I, often you take people literally, physically out of and to a place that they have not been in order to start unlocking their thinking. And William, I actually wanted to ask you this question, because sometimes you must feel the irony of having run all these really major negotiations around the world and help governments find peace, and then suddenly your own country, like almost while you weren't watching, just implodes completely. And how do you draw on those negotiation skills and the lessons of this whole thing about rehumanizing, de-enclaving, people to people, to fix that problem? Is it fixable? Is it even worth trying? What would you do with a path in the US?
Yeah, well, good question. First of all, I'm loving this conversation, really loving what everyone's saying here. So, and yes, it was profoundly humbling, to be working on intractable conflicts in the Middle East and Venezuela, Korea, Afghanistan, and then find out that we have an intractable conflict right here at home that needs addressing, that really is so deep-seated that it produces this kind of despair of, can I even talk to people so-called on the other side? I mean, and that's why we need the lesson of the path is so needed here in this country at this particular moment, which is drop your preconceptions. I know we have preconceptions. I'll just tell you one story from the path. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was walking the path in southern Turkey, just north of the Syrian border, and I happened to have a conversation with a Syrian very radical Islamist, very conservative, wanted Sharia, was fighting. He was fighting a jihad against the Syrian government at the time. He was a rebel commander. He was leading 3,000 men in war, and he looked like the perfect Western stereotype of a terrorist. The beard, everything. In his late 20s, and so I was watching myself as I was talking with him, listening to him, and just watching the preconceptions that we all have, the preconceptions of the other. And so I asked him, so what led you into the fight in the first place? What got you fighting? He said, well, I was in university. And I said, so what were you studying in university? Poetry. I was studying poetry. In fact, I won the national prize in poetry for Syria. I said, really? And then what happened? He said, well, I wrote a poem that was critical of the regime, of the government. And I got tortured. I got tortured 3 times. My uncles were tortured. So, you can kind of, and then I said to him, if you survive this war, what are you planning to do? He said, well, there's a young woman in Egypt I'm in love with. And I would love to go to Egypt and meet her again and get married. And then I asked him, I was just asking, just being curious, just asking questions. I said, so what do you most fear for your own country? He said, religious extremism. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I believe in Sharia law and everything, but I don't believe that we should be imposing it by force on people. That's against my religion. That's against my, and then at the very end of a 3-hour conversation, I asked him, I'm going back to the West. Do you have any message you'd want to bring to the people in the West? And he said, yeah. He said, when people watch us on the television screens, the war in Syria, they see numbers of people killed and so on. He said, just remember that every number is a woman, a child, a man. Every one of us has a life and has a soul. That's what I want you to tell them. So I watched in that 3-hour conversation how my preconceptions just dissolved. So, someone who's like, okay, that's the image, that's the stereotype. And that's really, I think, what we need to bring today in every context, is to drop the preconceptions, listen with our hearts, be curious, sit down with people. It may be hard at first, but if they're not listening to you, the best way is to start by listening to them.
Yeah, that's also, and that story really resonates with me, having lived in Lebanon for so many years and met so many refugees. And it is so, it's so easy to dehumanize, to see them as numbers on a list. 800,000 refugees knocking on the doorstep of Europe. It just creates a completely different mentality. And one of the things that I remember thinking, walking the path, and I don't know whether you have had this experience, but it's again a very powerful one in this moment where we are not walking for this reason. We may be walking for, either we're not walking because we're all in lockdown, or we're walking for rage or for protest or for grief or for anger. But when we were walking the path, this extraordinary path, meeting people on that path, and there were a few who we met, you were able to look at them in a completely different way, because they were not, walking for work or for some utilitarian purpose. They were doing it for love or discovery. And so that no matter who they are, or if you've never seen them before, they're strangers, they don't share your language, they look nothing like you, you can still see that maybe there are things in common. You can imagine their experience and their journey in a completely different way, and you relate to them as a person in a completely different way. And it made me think also, because the path, this idea of the path was a complex, it wasn't a simple thing to set up. And we talk about the people on it, we talk about the homes, we talk about the hospitality, but it had to be, it had to be approved by governments. It had to go through governments. They had to see the value, they had to see the importance. And these are not governments that are known for their love of adventure and the joy of discovery. And most governments are not, including our own in the West, that are incredibly closed and insular. So I guess a question that I had, and this is for Josh and William and all of you, because I know that Susan also played a big role in setting this up in the early days, is, as negotiators, as conflict specialists, what was how did you convince them that this was something that was needed and important? And why did you set it up for people, not governments? It could have gone in such a different way. It could have been a tourist trade thing, did a very simple terms that made a bunch of money for for national authority. So why did you set it up for people, and how did you convince these institutions? What's the role of these big governments in creating a space for this, and how could we replicate it?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in if that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, I mean, I'll be very candid that, this was an iterative process, one that, we weren't always sure where to go with this. Yes, there were, long distance walking trails, but not through a region like the Middle East, et cetera. And I think one of the things that we understood very clearly was that we needed to be a catalyst here, that this was not ours to do, that if this was going to last for the millennia that we hoped, that it would be the people on the path that would own it and grow it and nurture it. And so our job was to try to figure out, how do we create the space for this to happen? And I think very clearly we thought, okay, let's see if we can get some international recognition for this and some credibility. But the next step was, as you said, Claire, going to the national governments, because things just didn't happen if you didn't get their sign off. And that was actually the sort of balancing act, was that we asked very candidly if they would sign off on this but not be very involved, because we figured exactly what you said, which is that if the governments were too involved, it wouldn't go anywhere. It would really, more things would get in the way than be helpful. And so once we had that, and we realized as well, by the way, that when we would start going to the local communities wouldn't do anything with us unless we had a letter from either the Minister of Tourism or the Foreign Ministry saying that this was okay and that this had their stamp of approval, because lots of projects would come and go from there. But I think it was that sort of sequence. And I think really, I mean, in some ways, the government said yes, because from my point of view, for two reasons. One, they wanted people to come. They wanted people to see their country and their world. But also, a number of people mentioned that there weren't many regional endeavors that were out there, and to be part of something that was regional in nature, even if it wasn't necessarily based at the governmental level, was attractive. And the last thing, I guess, that I would add is the figure of Abraham and Ibrahim. He's a living figure in the Middle East, a little different than the rest of the world. And I think that if there was a way to honor that figure, people wanted to be part of that. I remember out in southeastern Turkey, there's a region called Şanlıurfa, which is where the path really rests, because Haran is the city nearby where Abraham heard the call to go forth. And we were told by an Ibrahim expert there that there were about 400,000 or so people in that region, and about half are men, and about 60% of those folks are named Ibrahim in his honor. And so every time you turn around, someone's yelling Ibrahim. And so there was that element that, people wanted to be part of this, and they saw it as a way of honoring that figure that, like I said, was very much in the villages and the stones and in every aspect of life there, that I think it made it in so many ways appealing to the places along the path.
Go ahead.
If I may, I'd like to just add to this. For me, the word that is so powerful here is love. And it starts within each of us. I'm feeling this incredible love among the panelists. Some of us have known each other forever, and some of us haven't, but we've formed over our preparation talks, and now there's this incredible, there's a weaving of us together to have this conversation. And that connection and love is what the path brings, because love in action is about wanting the highest good for the other. That's one way of thinking about love, is wanting the common good, is wanting the highest good for the other. And Confucius has been talking about this a long time. When I discovered this, I was blown away. When John Marks, my husband, who's the founder of Search for Common Ground, when he and I went to live in Jerusalem for 2 years during the Second Intifada, my question was, how do we enter this society? We'd been working there for years, but how do we enter it and live in it? I remembered what that had been like in South Africa, when people came from all over the world to contribute and didn't quite know how to become a part of us. And I read this, what Confucius had to say, and it built on, I think all of us have a similar idea of presence, of that what we do when we go into conflict, whether we're there directly or not, we bring our presence. And if our presence can be rooted in love and connection, then we bring love and connection just by being there. And we find a way to be with people who are different. But Confucius had this to say. He said, listening, and I want to pick up on what William was saying about listening. He said, when we, I have it here just to make sure I get it right. He said, when we listen with our ears, it's good. And when we listen with understanding, it's good. But when we listen with spirit, that is when everything changes. And he said this, if you can do this, you will be able to go among people in the world without upsetting them. You will not enter into conflict with their ideal image of themselves. If they will listen, sing them a song. If not, keep silent. Don't try to break down the door. Just be there among them, for there is nothing else for you to be but be one of them. Then you may have success. And to me, this is like it's a path for us who wish for peace, who long for peace, who work for peace, with all our mistakes and all the things that we managed to do, with everything that we are. This spoke to me so deeply when I discovered this, and it became my roadmap for now becoming the person going to live in another place rather than having people come to live in my place.
That's an extraordinary quote, and that spirit of empathetic, open-minded discovery is being willing to just put your preconceptions aside and go out and embrace a new possibility is kind of the founding principle of the path in many ways. No, that's what it's been so about. And it takes, we talked about the kind of the power of transformational walking, Martin Luther King, and the history of transformational walking. It takes that idea and puts it into a different context, a new and more troubled world, and takes it out of the one particular wrong and injustice, and makes it kind of a part of the spirit of justice and connecting people and bringing strangers together and helping people be part of journeys that can just enlighten us about what the world really is and who we are and make us less afraid. What I wanted to do in that spirit, if it's okay, is just to imagine for a second that you guys are all fairy godmothers and had the ability to bequeath one gift from the path to a problem that you really feel is top of your mind at the moment in the world. Can I ask you, before we go to questions from the chat, what would that gift from the path be if you could just bless one problem with it? Maybe to start with Ra.
It is the power of hospitality, which is sourced by an open heart, right? And it's interesting, I was thinking about, you know, all of the places we went on the path and just the mantra, welcome, you are welcome here, you are welcome here. And you felt it. There was a sincerity, there was a depth. People looked you in the eye, the smiles were genuine. They fed you until you wanted to fall out. You know, and again, the sort of universality of food and the way that we see our humanity in the very, very simple things. But the thing that I would bequeath is the practice, because I believe that it is a disciplined practice to keep the heart open, no matter what, that there is a way that our joy and our hope are acts of faith and resilience, that those are the things that actually enable the impossible to become possible. And that is my practice now in the midst of what we're facing, right? Is that open-heartedness. And absolutely for me, the bearing witness to that in every region we touched along the path. It was so palpable, so moving. So that would be what I would be from the path to the world. The practice of true hospitality. What makes the strange familiar is the open-heartedness.
The practice of true hospitality. It's a beautiful idea. Susan?
Well, as Ra was talking, I felt as though the next thing to possibly say was to replace outdated thinking. And outdated thinking is not about hospitality. In South Africa, the outdated thinking was apartheid, and we replaced that with new thinking, and because the thinking we'd had made apartheid possible. Betty Shabazz, who the wife of Malcolm X, she said, walls turned sideways are bridges. And my sense is that we can always find a way to begin the process of replacing outdated thinking, of starting to change things. Walls start in the mind. The walls that we build start inside us, in our minds and hearts. So we must change our minds. We can also change our hearts. And the tool that we can use to do that is to reach out to people who are not like us, and to return to this theme of listening and remembering that listening is not agreeing. So we can always listen. And so my contribution would be replacing outdated thinking.
Replacing outdated thinking is something that we urgently need in so many walks of life. It's like these great big blocks in the road that, you know, you just know that you need to push it out of the way, but you can't do it by yourself. I think that's possibly one of the key things, that it needs kind of people from both sides to do a bit of pushing. It's not one side, then the block just falls over and it's still a barrier. So Josh, maybe from you.
Yeah, I would say that I think one of the things that I was always struck by my time on the path was that everybody has a story. And if you take the time to really listen to it, it has an amazing way of disarming, as well as helping you to understand. You know, so I've been looking a little bit at the chat box and some of the things that people are saying. And, you know, how do you understand somebody who isn't quote unquote rational, or, you know, digs in on things? And I think if you begin by simply saying, you know, tell me about you, like, tell me about your story. How did you get here? It has a way of changing people, and it has a way of changing you, because what you're going to get back is most often not what you expect. And so, you know, I think we need to really use the power of story to humanize each other, but also to be able to share with folks, you know, what's my experience been like, so that you can understand how I arrived at where I am.
Yeah, everyone has a story, and that story is probably not what you're thinking before you start. And it will, it's good to have, and humbling to have your expectations overthrown and realize how useless prejudgments are. So, William?
Wow, well, first of all, I resonate deeply with what everyone else has said here. I guess what I would add in terms of a lesson from the path is the simple elemental power of human dignity. You know, the story I told before about the Syrian rebel commander, you know, he'd been humiliated, tortured, you know, at the root of so much conflict, the deep-seated conflict, is people basically do not feel seen. They don't feel seen. Their humanity doesn't feel seen. And that's what's happening in this country right now, is we're not seeing the other. And I remember a story from the path of a very simple woman who lived on the path in northern Jordan. She was extremely poor. She had 7 kids. Her husband couldn't work. He was disabled. She was partially blind. She couldn't do anything, but one thing she could do was cook. She cooked so deliciously. Her name was Ahmad, and one of our partners there working on the path in Jordan found out about her and said, why don't I just bring the walkers to your home and you can feed them lunch? And so the walkers, there was no furniture. They just sat on her dirt floor. The toilet was broken, but her food was so delicious. It was made from all the local ingredients, as you know, just like all those herbs and so on from the fields and the wild things. And it was so delicious. They loved it, and they came back again and again and again. She used the money to fix her toilet, and pretty soon, I mean, actually, within years, she was teaching courses on online cooking, and online on cooking, and Ahmad, but the one thing she said to one of our colleagues was so touching. She said, you have made me visible in a place where people were once ashamed to look at me. It's dignity. It's about dignity. And that's what the path is about, is when you actually sit down and receive someone's hospitality, as Ra was saying, you give them dignity, you honor them. They honor you. It's a ritual, it's not an economic exchange. It's a ritual of you honor them, they honor you. They see your dignity, you see their dignity. And to me, if there's a key to dealing with conflict these days, it's to see the other's dignity.
That is such a powerful point. It reminded me of the walk that we were on, William, and the lady that we met and stayed with, who had actually been a fighter for the Palestinian cause in Lebanon, an old lady now, mother and a grandmother. And we were in the kitchen washing up after the meal together. And I can remember taking her hand and whispering to her that I had a Jewish background. I was really nervous to do it. I was scared to do it. And she turned around and she kind of squeezed my hand and she whispered to me, she says, we don't see Jews around here now. And we only see them in the tanks when they go by. And my children only see them that way. We need to see more people like you. We need to see, and they need to see us. We need to see each other to know each other. And that's what she said. And this is somebody who spent her life fighting to come to that understanding that the path had given her. It was really an extraordinary moment. For me, the lesson that I took, that I would bequeath to the US, to all the stuff going on in the UK at the moment, is get out of your echo chamber, get out from behind your screen, get out from all the people who agree with you, and go somewhere they don't like you. They don't know you. Be brave. And do that, because you cannot fix what is wrong with the world from behind your computer agreeing with all of your friends on Twitter. It just cannot be done. Negotiations don't work that way. We take people out of their comfort zone. And if you want to be part of the solution, if you have to be outside your comfort zone, you have to go to the place that you don't know and see what it is that you're judging, and let them see you. Be brave enough to be seen. I think that is another, maybe the counterpart to that lesson. What I think we're going to do now is, there have been some amazing, there are so many questions. Can I just say that I'm seeing the most amazing questions coming up on this, and there are so many of them. So if people don't mind, what I'm going to do is try and group them rather than do one by one, because they're coming in different themes. And I want to start with one that's a challenge. And it's come from a few people, but it's a challenge. I think it's a good challenge. And the challenge is, so, the path is a great idea, but what has it achieved in your view? I'll throw it open to anyone who wants to answer that one. No? Or I think I'm going to pick on Josh.
So what is it? I think, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's achieved a lot, and part of it depends on who you are and what your role was in this. Because I think if you were to talk to many of the people who were involved in the homestay program, they would have never imagined being part of something. So I think, honestly, in some ways, let me just reflect on a quick story, because I think it really highlights one of the things that doesn't get mentioned a lot. So I remember talking to a Palestinian father about why he got involved in the project. And he said, honestly, at the beginning, it was because of the economics and the resources that were part of it. But he said, we just had a group of Italian travelers who came through. And when they left, my 5-year-old son said to me, Dad, these people don't seem that different than me. Now, that may seem small and seem almost insignificant in certain ways. And yet that's actually the power of what something like this can do, because it changes people's views completely. The people who have gone, I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who has walked on the path for any period of time, whether it's an hour, a day, a week, a month, who hasn't come out of it with their view of the world changed, or that view of the region. And so I think that in part for me, what the biggest sort of impact is in those small ways. But then people take that and they make short videos and other kinds of things that have a ripple effect that slowly begins to say to folks, hey, maybe what you think you know isn't exactly right. And if that's the contribution of this path, then it's done something very special.
May I just add a quick comment here, Claire, which is that I'm so with Josh, and I've always felt that the small stories are the ground beneath the big stories. And I tend to always look at the small stories. We sometimes have the big stories of something being resolved, but really it's about what happens in people's lives and how they are transformed, how that 4-year-old boy says they're people just like us. So, to me, there's not in answer to this question, there's not one big achievement. There's this incremental accumulation of change that shifts all of us as we are touched by the path and we touch it.
It's like quantum entanglement. No, there are people who are living along this path and whose lives are set and along this path in the Middle East, and people across the West who have walked this path, and other parts of the Middle East who've come to walk their own country, whose lives continue to benefit from that experience of coming together in parallel ways throughout their lives. And that is a really extraordinary thing, that ripple effect of benefit. No. And one of the other questions that's come up, and it's come up in multiple people have asked this question, and it's really seems to be something that's coming from a very heartfelt place. Again and again, people are saying, listen, there are some people you just can't talk to. They will not listen. How do you crack open the people who will not listen? Is there any point in walking and meeting the other if the other's crazy? I'm going to throw that one to you, William, because I know you're doing a lot of thinking about that right now.
Well, thank you, Claire. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question. Getting to yes is like 40 years old, and I would say the most this year, and the most frequent question I've gotten probably in all these years, thousands of times, is, yeah, but how do you get to yes with someone who doesn't want to get to yes? How do you, I mean, it's just like, it's impossible. They're irrational. They're crazy. And all I can say is, over the 40 years that I've been wandering around the world, in the most impossible situations, right now I'm working in Afghanistan, North Korea, it's in the Middle East. I've yet to find a person or a situation that will not eventually yield to patient, persistent listening. It takes time. I mean, we want to do everything right away, but these conflicts are deep-seated. You cannot underestimate the traumas. People have closed ears. So absolutely, you have to welcome all of that. You have to welcome their skepticism, welcome their closedness, be curious about it, take time. But I've watched, when I was a graduate student at Harvard, over 45 years ago, the most impossible conflicts were like South Africa, the blacks and whites were going to fight each other forever. The Cold War, the professors were saying the Berlin Wall will stay there forever. It's like for as long as you want. Northern Ireland, the Catholics and Protestants, it's religious. They're reading it with their mother's milk. And I watched. I was there in South Africa. I was there in Moscow so many times. I was there in Northern Ireland and so many other places around the world. Just Colombia, 50-year civil war, where I've been working for many years. And patient, persistent, taking the time, really taking these conflicts seriously. Because when people ask me, oh, the Middle East, that's an impossible conflict. My answer is, have we really tried? Have we really tried? So I don't think there are impossible conflicts. I just think there are conflicts we haven't just made possible yet by bringing all the things that my fellow panelists have been talking about, bringing the power of listening, acknowledging human dignity, love, open-heartedness, and then skill in negotiation. And that's why we need negotiation. And all of you out there in the world right now, there's so many hard negotiations out there. And this is what we have to do, is practice every day. It doesn't happen. It's not like magic. It's not a quick and easy technical fix. But, I'll just end by saying, I was once in the Malaysian rainforest talking to an elder from the most peaceful people on the planet. Anthropologists consider this person the semi-hunter-gatherers. And I was asking him about war. Why didn't they have war? He said, hurricanes and typhoons and earthquakes, we might not be able to do something about that. But war is made by humans. It can be stopped by humans. Destructive fighting is made by humans. And what was the solution? He said, we don't take sides. That's our solution. When our friend, our neighbor gets into a fight, we don't take their side. We take the third side, the side of the whole. That's the secret.
A great mutual colleague of William and mine, who was a key architect of the Good Friday Agreement, often says that agreement was called very famously, when it was finally struck after hundreds of years of conflict, it was called the Agreement for Slow Learners, Sunningdale for Slow Learners, because it basically replicated agreements that had previously been made but had never stuck. And it just goes to show that the journey may feel endless, but actually it's taking you somewhere you just don't know where yet. And that's why it's good to continue. Now, listen, we are already over time. I want to ask one more of the questions that's on here and just get a couple of words from each of you to round off. And it's a great question, actually, and it's come up a couple of times, which is, the path is part of our history. Abraham is part of the collective human history, but it's also a legacy for humanity. How do we protect that legacy and make sure that it continues and grows to other parts of the world?
Claire, could we hear from Ra on this last
Yes,
as well? I'm
absolutely.
missing her and wanting to hear. So if we could just step back a little bit and then whatever.
Thank you, Susan. And Claire, listen, you have the hardest job today of all. But please know that I'm dancing with you gracefully and lovingly. There's nothing but love and admiration as I watch you hold the space for all of us. I just wanted to add, because I just so deeply agree with William, that we have to be willing to give up the right to be right and what we think being right entitles us to. There are many things that we have done in the name of being right that actually have been dehumanizing. And the minute we decide that another is unworthy of whatever, fill in the blank, right? Because, we believe that we're right and they are wrong, that's where possibility dies. So I'm wondering if we can be in the practice of giving up the right to be right, then all kinds of possibilities become available to us. I saw, shout out to Nazar, I saw you put Daryl Davis's work in the thread with the link. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Daryl's work, he is through partnership and collaboration been able to help many men leave the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan in the US. And he's a musician, and that is sort of his orientation, but he leads with listening. He leads with listening. And so, one of the things that we can do when we don't feel we're right is we can grow our capacity to listen and really take the other end. That was it.
And what do you think, Ra, should be the legacy of the path? How do we preserve it and take it forward? Where does it go next?
For me, it changed my life. I say this to William all the time. It gave me the capacity to love and forgive and see in ways that I had not been able to before. And I think the legacy of the path lives in every single one of us who've ever walked it. It lives in the stories that we tell about it. It lives in the invitations that we extend to others. And so I think for those of you today who've been listening, if you have not had the opportunity to engage the path, you have this moment, this opportunity extend and reach out. I know Anisha would meet you with loving open arms. You know, so the opportunity is now that you know to take this conversation and extrapolate our lessons and our stories, but also to make your own. And you can walk anywhere. It's another thing that William has taught me through the work of the path. We can walk anywhere. It's available to all of us.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you everyone so much for what I can say, you know, is an event that lasted a little over an hour, but could clearly have gone on for a very long time. This has been just an incredible amount of learning. And I know that we are so pleased to have had such great attendance. To those of you who have been asking in the chat, yes, the recording will be made available. So do not worry about that. It just takes us a little bit of time to format, but it will be up on the PON website and presumably on the API website. And we really look forward to seeing participants back for some of our future events at PON. We have 2 events coming up this week, one on Thursday with Pam Steiner and one next week with Alain Lempereur. So please do check that out, as well as all the wonderful things on the API website. And we really thank you to all of our panelists, to Claire, our moderator, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and week. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.